Hey, Matt, this is the 10-minute Bible Hour, and when I travel, one of my favorite things to look at are all the horrible translations from whatever local language I'm hanging out with into English, which I'm a little more familiar with. And the internet tells me that the worst and funniest offenses happen in East Asia, and so I went and looked for some of those, and I'm going to share them with you now. I think this is some sort of encouraging placard to put at your desk. It says, "You are my love angle. Don't treat me like potato." The name of the food. There's garlic sweet roast chicken. Oh, that sounds good. This one over here is called special pork chop. Oh, that sounds delicious. Oh, what's this yummy one? Germany sexual harassment. I'll take 2 of those. I think these are pork rinds. It just says only puke. Oh, here's a hook that you could use to hang things. Maybe for hang yourself. This one is the sign for the vegetable aisle in a grocery store, I assume in Korea. The English translation simply says vegetables. This one is ramen noodles. It's just soup for. And then this one finally is just a complete acknowledgement that their translation robot was broken because it just says translate server error. I'm sorry, I need to regroup. The point is, translation is really important. Languages aren't the same. Cultures aren't the same. And these examples are from cultures that coexist on the globe at the same exact moment. So you wouldn't think it would be that tough, since it's the same year for everybody, to just take the code that is Korean or Japanese and just decode it and make it into English. But it's not that simple. And if you've ever tried to translate something, or if you speak another language, you know it's not that simple. And so when we work on translating the Bible from the original Hebrew or the original Greek into English, we have another layer of challenge in that those translations are being drawn from a culture that hasn't been around for a couple thousand years. And language, as you know, it isn't just a code, like something from a Cracker Jack box where you put the red over the thing and all of a sudden you can read something you otherwise couldn't. It's not a point for point, word for word thing. It's concepts and ideas, but it's also a language is a complex whole that expresses culture and emotion and historical issues and emotional preferences that are shared among a people group. So you need somebody who is very fluent in one culture, not just language, and very fluent in another culture, not just the language, to really properly transmit those ideas from the one to the other. It is the easiest thing in the world when you picture Bible translation to imagine a bunch of people who are evil hacks with an agenda to manipulate unwitting English readers into believing in a warped version of Jesus in the Bible. But the truth is, the people who do this are folks who have dedicated their lives to understanding now culture and 2,000 years ago culture. And even then, it's still brutally hard to translate the Bible from that into something that you can read today. And in this video, I want to talk about the necessity of translation, and I want to talk about some of the processes and difficulties of translation. And we'll just kind of skim the surface this time around and get deeper into it over the next few videos. I'm Matt. This is the 10-minute Bible Hour. Here we go. All right, so simply put, you've got a source language, which in this case is Old School Greek, and you've got a receptor language, which in this case is New School English. One of these two, you're probably pretty good at. You were raised around English, you understand the nuances and the mores and the stuff you better not say in that setting, and the stuff that if you say it just this way, it's going to be kind of a funny joke and a little bit of a ribbing at somebody. You know when something's a dig, you know when something makes you uncomfortable at parties. You've maybe even coined a phrase or two that caught on and affected the language just by what you do. Why? Why do you get it so well? Well, you were born into it, you contribute to it, you're constantly socialized into it, and you live in the culture that informs it and vice versa. Is it in any way possible to duplicate that process through scholarship in studying a language from 2,000 years ago? I don't think so. I think even the rock stars of translation can't travel back in time and live in this world to fully get it. But does that mean that we can't understand it at all? Well, no, certainly not. What we need to do if we want to understand this is listen to people who were raised in this culture, who were brought up in this, who did help shape the language. So all we got to do is get our grubby mitts on stuff that people wrote from the first century and immerse ourselves in it and try to figure out how they used all of these words so we can accurately convey the meaning. Well, throughout history, this has been an interesting process because Greek, I don't want to say devolved, but it did change. It morphed into other things as history went along. The same way English has morphed into other things as it's gone along. And you being an expert in modern 21st century English isn't going to make it that much easier for you to read 13th century English. It's just almost a totally different language. So as scholarship went along through the late classical age and the Middle Ages, people were operating off of a slightly different expression of Greek, and that created challenges. But as things move along, we've got some classical documents floating around, some very famous Greek books, stuff written by Homer, and even though it's several centuries before the New Testament, it still provides some points of reference. But then in the 19th century, the whole translation world gets flipped on its ear by this amazing discovery in a place called, I'm surely going to butcher this, Oxyrhynchus, Egypt. What happened there were these two Oxford scholars who went and dug, and they found an ancient garbage pit, this old school dump filled with papyri that existed there in just the perfect conditions to be dug up, carefully, chemically treated, unrolled, and studied. And what they found was a treasure trove of linguistic knowledge dating from the 3rd century-ish BC all the way up into the late classical age, that's like the 600s AD. What that means is a bunch of those documents were written in 1st century AD Greek. Now, there's some copies of important books and things in there, but for the most part, it's correspondence, like business dealings and maybe a letter back and forth to somebody of little consequence. Seems like it'd be useless, except you get to see what everyday normal Greek was like. And there are people who have taken their whole lives and looked at discoveries just like that to be able to say, okay, this word, which appears in the New Testament, appears in these papyri 300-400 times. Here. And overwhelmingly, it seems to be used like this. Oh, but in a 5% of the time, it seems to be used more like a joke or a jab. And all of that serves to eventually craft a picture of all the different ways in which Greek words might have been used. Think about it like this. If I say the word steal, you know that I could mean taking something without permission. I could mean a crazy good deal on something. I could mean advancing a base without the ball in play in baseball, or with a slight change in spelling, I could mean a type of metal. You just know that because you're immersed in this language and fully conversant. In the same way you can figure that out instantly, so someone immersed in the study of Greek documents can know this language that well and thus be equipped to translate the meanings effectively into the receptor language that is English. El mundo es un pañuelo. I had no idea what that meant. I was talking with a Spanish-speaking lady, and she dropped that in the middle of conversation, and I had to go, time out. It sounded like you said the world is a handkerchief. She's like, oh, yeah, I forget. That's an expression we have. For you, I think you would say it's a small world. Like, oh, yeah, we do say that. The world is a handkerchief? Really? How did you guys get to that? And she just shrugged. I looked it up. Sure enough, that's a thing. Well, imagine if you were up in front of people with that knowledge and you were interpreting to a group of English speakers for the Spanish lady. And she says, I was traveling and I ran into a buddy in the middle of a crazy place. And we were like, what? Crazy seeing you here. The world is a handkerchief. Would you say the world is a handkerchief to that English audience? Like, no, obviously. You would translate the concept, even though the words are different, so that her meaning could be taken completely accurately. And nobody would accuse you of dishonesty for doing that. This is good interpretation. But the Bible's a trickier animal. I know not everybody's watching this is a Christian. And great, happy to have you here no matter who you are and what you're into. It's fun to get to explore this with you. But Christians overwhelmingly believe that God is behind this document. And at least in my country, I think the majority of Christians believe that at least in the original autographs, this thing is accurate. Like it's inspired and without error from God. So that creates a bit of a conundrum when you run into a Hebrew expression. It just means nothing in English, or would even come off as, frankly, kind of offensive in English. You don't want to mess with what God said because he's like God, the master of all existence, and operates outside of time and space, and the knower of all things, and the inventor of life. But like the way he said that in Hebrew, sounds like somebody's taking a dump when what he's really trying to say is like somebody felt it deeply in their heart. So then there's a debate that goes on in translation circles about what the best way is to do this. Some would say, even if it's clumsy, what we got to do to honor the source content that we think is inspired by God is go word for word, and people are just going to have to look that up and figure it out if it strikes them as weird. Other people would say, I think thought for thought is more important. And if there is an identical thought that uses different words, it becomes the responsibility of the translator to make that concept precisely translate to English, even if it means a different set of verbiage. What you're going to see as you look at different Bible translations that are floating around out there is that some are really slavishly committed to literal, precise translation, even though there is no such thing as a truly literal translation from one language to the other. Others are going to really err on the side of let's make this understandable. And some people can see the merit in both. But one way or another, that's a challenging question that makes the art of biblical translation a bit dicey. So everything that I'm describing here in this brief little intro to this topic smacks of human involvement. And that's because a computer can't do it. The understanding of culture, the artistry that goes into this, it just can't be simulated by technology. So people have to be involved. And if that's the case, how do we know it's reliable? I mean, how do you keep somebody from being like, well, I want Jesus to be like this, so I interpret it this way, and I put it in this document. Now people all over the world internalize this and read it, and now I've just co-opted and hijacked Jesus in a gigantic translation coup. How do we know that's not happening? Some people would say that's exactly what's happening, and that's what's wrong with all of these modern translations. Well, there are a couple ways to get around that and to feel pretty secure in the reliability of how these translations work. First of all, you got to start with humility and just understand that there is no perfect translation of anything from any source language to any receptor language. If it could be perfect, it would have to be in the same language and a direct copy. Languages are cultural constructs that are rooted in a moment, in an environment, in a set of social pressures, and no two sets of those things will perfectly align. As a result, somebody has to put a foot in both worlds and do their best to draw one to the other. That means that you could take 10 different people and have them perform that task, and they're going to express those things in 10 slightly different ways. So a way to insulate ourselves from that getting weird is to do this thing in teams. Translation does not happen usually with one lady sitting in a room with a candle fixing the entire Bible. These modern translations, you're talking about hundreds of people being involved. Then you're talking about bringing in an entirely new crew to do a set of revisions 10, 15, 20 years down the road. You're talking about people with multiple tasks in the translation process. So you're going to have people who are maximum expert at Greek style, the cultural nuance of stuff back in the day, working on the same book with who is someone who's an expert in English style, the cultural nuance of today. Then you're going to have somebody who's an expert in theology in the mix there, who really understands what Paul is doing in this passage or what Jesus is saying in this sermon, so that the interest in stylistic concerns doesn't trump the interest in accurately reflecting the theology. This is hard, but it's done in teams, and by doing so in teams, you prevent the wholesale bias from taking over and turning that translation into a reflection of personal preference instead of the best attempt to accurately reflect what's going on there. But here's the deal. With the exception of a few people who, frankly, I think are probably nice but are just way off base, no one within Christianity thinks that translation is inspired. This is a crucial principle for understanding this thing. This is not the kind of deal where all of the people who worked on this in the 1970s and 1980s got together and there was a magic moment and little balls of fire appeared above the translators' heads in Palos Heights, Illinois, and they all felt inspiration and they had magic powers just long enough to do this, and then through magic they produced this thing, and if you don't believe it, you're against God magic. Hitler? It's nonsense. This is a human product, and we either have to accept that or get really, really, really good at Greek ourselves, which is an option. Long story short, Christians believe the Bible holds itself out as being that God jumped into the world and intervened to reveal himself in written form, in this case in the 1st century AD. In this case, in this language. This is the language people spoke. This is the culture people were in, which means God jumped into their world and communicated with their words in their style so that they could get it. Christian theology, which again, you are welcome to reject, but Christian theology holds out the idea that God bent over backwards to make himself known to people. If you want to encounter the stuff that holds itself out as being the Word of God in your corresponding heart language, you're going to have to accept that translation is going to have to be part of the process. Like I just said, if you want to go learn Greek, you can, and then you can read it in the original language, but you'll never be a 1st century Greek. So whether you engage in that exercise or this exercise, either way, there is an element of interpretation that is going to be part of the process of you encountering the words written down in the Christian scriptures. I, for one, am more than comfortable with that and think that it follows the entire incarnational pattern of God stepping into the world, taking on forms that we are used to and can relate to in order to make himself known to people. I know that there are other smart people who look at that and just say it's a deal killer for me. I don't like the way Christianity holds this out as having happened. It's hard for me to believe. So it's interesting to look on from a distance at what you all are into, but it's not for me. I know I say this every time at the end of these videos, but I like you either way, and I'm grateful that you're here processing it with me either way. And either way, I hope that conversations like this move the process forward for each of us, whatever that might look like, and trying to wrestle through what I think is one of the really giant questions in life. Thanks for doing this with me. I'm Matt. More on the translation stuff to come. We'll catch you soon.